A black waitress pulled the rich CEO's wife across the floor by her hair. The whole room froze when they found out the reason why. "Are you stupid? Who is this clumsy waitress who ruined my expensive dress?" The angry shout was like a knife cutting through the happy chatter of the restaurant. Everyone at the Gilded Room, the fanciest charity event in the city, turned to see the commotion. Dark red wine stained Isabella Thorne's beautiful white dress. Under the bright crystal lights, the stain looked like fresh blood. The piano music stopped. People lifted their phones to record. The air was thick with gasps. Standing in front of Isabella was Sarah, a 34-year-old waitress. She stood completely still, a silver tray rattling in her shaking hands. A few drops of the spilled wine were still on her fingers. Her simple black uniform looked out of place in a room filled with diamonds and designer suits. I am so sorry, ma'am," Sarah stuttered, her eyes wide with fear. "It wasn't my fault. Someone pushed me." "Be quiet," Isabella snapped, taking a step closer. The diamonds on her neck sparkled as she pointed a finger at Sarah. "You people are always making excuses. Do you have any idea what this dress is worth?" Sarah felt a lump in her throat. "Please, I can help you clean it. Don't you lay a hand on me, you trash." The word hit Sarah like a slap. All the other waiters froze. Even Isabella's powerful husband, Mr. Thorne, stopped his conversation, his face growing hard. The room was suddenly so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Sarah tried hard not to cry. Isabella leaned in, her voice a low, hateful whisper. "You should be grateful we even let your kind work in a place like this." That was it. Something inside Sarah that had been buried for 10 long years finally broke. 10 years of hiding her pain. 10 years of staying silent. 10 years of pretending the hurtful words didn't sting. Her breathing became fast and heavy. Her hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from pure rage. The guests started whispering. "What's wrong with her?" "Oh, I think she's about to lose it." Then Sarah moved. With a sudden burst of energy, she slammed the tray onto a table, lunged forward and grabbed Isabella Thorne by her perfectly styled blonde hair. A huge scream erupted from the crowd. Glasses fell and shattered. As Sarah dragged the screaming woman across the slick marble floor, tears streamed down her own face. "You thought I'd forget?" Sarah screamed, her voice filled with pain. "You thought I'd ever forget what you did?" "Get off of me!" Isabella shrieked, kicking wildly. "She's crazy!" Sarah's voice cracked as she yelled the words that would stop everyone's heart. "You let my baby die." The entire ballroom went completely silent. Isabella's face was pale, her lips trembling. She said nothing. In that moment, the shiny world of the rich and powerful fell apart, and everyone knew a secret, much darker than spilled wine, was about to be revealed. "Let me go." "You're hurting me!" Isabella shrieked, her designer heels scraping uselessly against the polished marble floor. Her beautiful hair was tangled in Sarah's tight grip. The fancy restaurant had turned into a scene of chaos. People gasped and pointed their phones. Waiters rushed around, not knowing what to do. One of them yelled for security. Sarah's breaths were sharp and painful. "You think a little pain matters to you? You think I forgot what it felt like to be alone?" Two large security guards in black suits finally pushed through the crowd. They lunged for Sarah, but she shoved one of them back with surprising strength. It was the strength of a mother who had lost everything. Her voice, filled with tears, rose above the noise. "You left me alone in that room to bleed." Isabella's eyes grew wide with fear. "You're insane! Get her away from me!" she screamed, scratching at Sarah's arms. "Don't you call me insane," Sarah shouted, her voice breaking with 10 years of stored-up grief. "You destroyed my life. You took my baby from me." Suddenly, the restaurant's heavy front doors burst open. 2 police officers walked in, their faces serious. The crowd immediately parted for them, their whispers now quiet. "What's going on here?" the older officer asked, his voice calm but firm. Before Sarah could say a word, Mr. Thorne stepped in front of her, shielding his wife. "Officer, thank God you're here. Arrest this woman. he said, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. She attacked my wife for no reason. You all saw it. Sarah looked at him, tears making clean streaks down her dusty cheeks. No, that's not true. Please, you have to listen to me. Isabella hid behind her husband, putting on a show of being terrified. She's dangerous, Arthur. She's been following me for weeks. She's obsessed, Sarah gasped. You're a liar. She tried to take a step forward, but the officers quickly grabbed her arms, holding her back. You know what you did. Tell them what you did. The younger officer, a woman with kind, steady eyes, looked from the crying waitress to the rich, trembling socialite. Ma'am, please calm down, she said to Sarah. We can sort all of this out down at the station. Sarah shook her head wildly, her hair flying into her face. No, you don't get it. If you take me away, she gets away with it. She wins all over again. Isabella started crying fake tears, her voice dripping with false pity. She's sick, officer. We tried to help her years ago. She clearly needs professional help. Sarah froze. The coldness in Isabella's voice was like a knife in her heart. Help, you think what I have is a sickness? Grief is not a disease, she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. You can't just bury the truth like you buried my baby. The crowd gasped again. A woman in a pearl necklace whispered to her friend, Did she say a baby? Is she talking about that old story at the Thorne mansion? The one they covered up? Mr. Thorne's face changed. It was just a small change, but it was there. A flicker of confusion in his eyes. He looked at his wife, then back at Sarah. What story? Isabella, what is she talking about? Isabella forced a laugh, but it sounded brittle and fake. Honey, don't listen to her. She's just making up stories to get money from us. But her words died in her throat. Sarah, still held by the officers, slowly reached into the pocket of her waitress apron. She pulled out a small tarnished silver locket shaped like a heart. This, she said, her voice trembling but clear, is all I have left of her. The locket swung back and forth in the bright light of the chandeliers. It was old and dented, but it seemed to shine. The officer holding Sarah's arm paused. What's in it? He asked. With shaking fingers, Sarah opened the tiny locket. Inside, on one side, was a faded, folded picture of a newborn baby, wrapped in a hospital blanket. On the other side was a tiny, yellowed hospital ID bracelet. The name on it was faded, but the address was clear. Thorne Estate, 2015. Another wave of gasps went through the room. Mr. Thorne stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the bracelet. That was our address 10 years ago. Isabella, why does she have this? Isabella's perfect mask finally cracked. Enough, she snapped, her voice high and panicked. I told you she is a crazy liar. Sarah's voice cut through the air, raw with pain. Ask her, Mr. Thorne. Ask your wife where she was on the night of May 12th, 10 years ago. Ask her what she did. The police officers looked at each other. One of them reached for his radio. The other turned to Mr. Thorne. Sir, I think we need to hear what she has to say. Arthur Thorne stared at his wife. Her face was white as a sheet. Her lipstick was smeared and her eyes were wide with a terror that looked very, very real. For the first time all night he didn't see his beautiful, perfect wife. He saw a stranger. He saw a liar. Isabella, he whispered, his voice shaking. Tell me what happened, but it was too late. The truth was already out and it was screaming to be heard. The bright lights of the restaurant seemed to dim and fade away, replaced by the soft, golden light of a memory. The air, once filled with perfume and fancy food, now smelled of floor polish and old wood. The scene shifted. It was 10 years ago inside the massive Thorne mansion. Laughter and music drifted down a grand staircase where rich guests mingled, their diamonds sparkling. In a quiet hallway in the basement, a younger Sarah leaned against the wall trying to catch her breath. She was 7 months pregnant. Her belly a round swell beneath her simple maid's uniform. A sharp pain tightened low in her stomach and she placed a hand on it. It's okay, she whispered to her belly. Just a few more hours. We need this job. The sound of sharp footsteps echoed on the stone floor. Isabella Thorne, then in her early 30s, appeared at the end of the hall. She was wearing a stunning silver dress that shimmered like fish scales. Her perfume was so strong it made Sarah's head spin. What are you doing just standing there? Isabella snapped, her voice cold. The guests need more champagne. Sarah quickly straightened up. I'm sorry, ma'am. I just felt a little cramp. Isabella's eyes scanned Sarah's pregnant body with a look of disgust. You should have been more careful. We don't need our guests being reminded of what happens when people make poor choices. Stay down here and out of sight. Yes, ma'am, Sarah said quietly, looking down at the floor. Isabella turned to look at herself in a hallway mirror, fixing a diamond earring. And don't even think about asking for time off. You already took a day last week for a doctor's appointment. This is a household, not a charity. I understand, Sarah whispered, biting her lip to keep from crying. Upstairs, the party grew louder. Mr. Thorne was laughing with a politician, completely unaware of what was happening in his own basement. Sarah walked slowly toward the laundry room, grabbing onto a table for support as another wave of pain washed over her. It was much stronger this time. Please not now, she prayed. The head butler, an older man named George, saw the color drain from her face. Are you all right, Sarah? He asked with concern. She forced a weak smile. I'm just tired, George. That's all. The hours passed by in a blur of pain and fear. The party upstairs was in full swing, but downstairs Sarah was hiding in the small hot laundry room, breathing through contractions that were coming faster and faster. Sweat dripped down her forehead. The door swung open and Isabella stood there, her face a mask of annoyance. What are you doing? I need you to... She stopped when she saw Sarah leaning against a washing machine, her face tight with pain. I can't, Sarah whispered, panic rising in her voice. I think the baby is coming. My water just broke. Isabella froze. She glanced back toward the hallway where she could hear the mayor telling a loud joke. Then she slammed the laundry room door shut. Keep your voice down, she hissed. Do you want to ruin my party? Sarah grabbed her stomach, another contraction tearing through her. Please, ma'am. You have to help me. Please call an ambulance. Isabella's voice became sharp as glass. If I call an ambulance, reporters will be here in minutes. The headlines will be all about a maid giving birth at my party. Do you want to embarrass my husband like that? Stay here and be quiet. I'll get someone to help you after everyone is gone. Before Sarah could protest, Isabella turned the old key in the lock. Click. The sound was so final, so cold. Wait. Don't leave me in here. Sarah cried, pounding her fists on the thick wooden door. But all she heard were Isabella's footsteps quickly walking away, their sound swallowed up by the loud music from the party. Hours crawled by like years. The pain was unbearable. Sarah screamed until her throat was raw, but no one could hear her over the jazz band. Help me, somebody, please help me. No one came. The party finally ended. The last of the fancy cars drove away. The mansion grew quiet. In the first light of dawn, the only sound was the soft, weak cry of a newborn baby, a cry that quickly faded into silence. Sarah sat on the cold tile floor, rocking back and forth. She held a tiny, lifeless body wrapped in a clean towel. Wake up, sweetie, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Please, baby, wake up. When the lock finally turned and the door opened, bright sunlight spilled into the dark room. Isabella stood there, her makeup from the night before smeared. She held a half-empty glass of champagne. She froze when she saw Sarah and the silent bundle in her arms. A flicker of something, maybe shock, maybe guilt, crossed her face before she hid it. Oh God, she whispered. Sarah looked up, her eyes empty and broken. It's too late. She's gone. Isabella's hand trembled, the key to the door still clutched in her fingers. She looked around nervously, her mind racing. Fear, not sadness, filled her eyes. Nobody can know about this, she said, her voice a harsh whisper. Do you understand me? Nobody. Sarah's body shook with a sob. But you locked me in here. You did this. Isabella shook her head, taking a step back. It was a mistake. I didn't know this would happen. It was an accident. No. Sarah whispered, looking down at her daughter's perfect, still face. It wasn't an accident. You wanted your perfect party. You wanted silence. Isabella's hand tightened on her champagne glass until it shattered, cutting her palm. You can't prove anything. Sarah gently took the tiny hospital bracelet off her baby's wrist. It had the date and the mansion's address printed on it. She slipped it into her pocket. I have this, she murmured. Isabella's eyes narrowed. Give that to me. Sarah stared back, her gaze hollow. Never. Just then the butler, George, appeared at the top of the basement stairs, his face pale. Mrs. Thorne? The police are at the front gate. They said they got a call about screaming last night. Isabella instantly composed herself, her cold mask slipping back into place. Tell them it was nothing, she said smoothly. The maid simply had a miscarriage. A very unfortunate but private matter. She then turned her cold eyes back to Sarah. Clean this up, then get out of my house. I will send you money, enough money to make sure you keep your mouth shut for the rest of your life. Fresh tears fell from Sarah's eyes onto her baby's face. You can give me all the money in the world, Isabella, she whispered. But you'll never be able to buy yourself a clean conscience. The next morning, 2 police officers stood in the laundry room. They were polite but distant. They didn't ask many questions. Behind them, Isabella stood with her arms crossed, looking perfectly put together in a silk robe. Ma'am, one officer said gently to Sarah, not quite looking at her, we're very sorry for your loss. Mrs. Thorne told us what happened. We'll file the report as a stillbirth. Sarah looked up, her mind foggy with grief. Stillbirth? No, she was alive, she cried. Isabella locked me in that room. Isabella's voice was sharp and dismissive. Officer, she's hysterical. You can see the state she's in. She motioned to another maid who brought a blanket and wrapped it around Sarah's trembling shoulders. I will personally make sure she gets to a hospital and receives the best care. The officers nodded, clearly wanting to leave the uncomfortable situation. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. As soon as they were gone, Isabella turned to her husband, who had been watching from the doorway with a troubled expression. I'll handle this, Arthur. I'll call our lawyer. We'll make a generous donation to the policeman's benevolent fund. This will all just disappear. Arthur Thorne looked from his wife's cold, determined face to the weeping, broken woman on the floor. He didn't say a word, but a seed of doubt was planted in his heart. Hours later, Sarah sat on a hard plastic chair in a cold hospital hallway. A nurse, a kind-faced older woman named Mary, knelt down beside her. She had been the one to examine Sarah and her baby. Honey, Mary whispered, pressing something small and metallic into Sarah's hand. Sarah opened her palm and saw the hospital bracelet from her baby's wrist, along with a folded piece of paper. It's a copy of the intake form. It has the time I examined the baby and my notes. They're going to try and erase what happened here. They'll try to erase you. But paper and people remember. Sarah looked at the paper. In Mary's neat handwriting it said, infant born alive. Faint marks around nose and mouth suggest oxygen deprivation. She tried to breathe, Sarah whispered, a fresh wave of sobs shaking her body. Mary squeezed her hand tightly. They're powerful people, child. But the truth is more powerful. You hold on to it. One day it will matter. 2 days after that, Sarah stood alone in a small, forgotten cemetery on the poor side of the city. There was no fancy coffin, no flowers, no priest. There was only a small hole in the ground and a shoebox-sized bundle wrapped in a white blanket. The city skyline loomed in the distance, sparkling and indifferent. She gently placed the bundle in the ground. I'm so sorry, Lily, she whispered, giving her daughter the name she never got to hear. Mama should have fought harder. I should have protected you. She placed the hospital bracelet and a single wilting daisy on the fresh dirt. "I'm not strong enough to fight them now, baby girl," she said to the tiny grave. "But I will get strong. I will wait. And I promise you one day the whole world will know your name." A fire ignited in her eyes, a promise born from the deepest grief. "I will make her see what she did." The memory faded and the bright lights of the restaurant came rushing back. The shocked faces, the flashing phone cameras, the two police officers holding her arms. The echo of the locked laundry room door still rang in the air. Sarah's tears shined under the chandeliers. "That's what happened," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. She clutched the silver locket. "For 10 years I've held on, waiting for the day someone would finally believe me." The younger police officer, the woman with the kind eyes, stepped forward. "Ma'am, you mentioned a document?" "From a nurse?" With trembling hands, Sarah unfolded the crumpled, yellowed piece of paper she had kept safe for a decade. She handed it to the officer. It was the intake form Mary had given her. At the bottom was a faint but clear signature. Isabella Thorne, authorizing the hospital to handle the stillborn baby's remains. The officer's eyes widened as she read Mary's notes about oxygen deprivation. She looked up at her partner. "This matches a cold case file. An anonymous tip from a nurse back in 2015. It was about an infant death at the Thorne estate. The case was closed due to lack of evidence." A wave of murmurs swept through the restaurant. Isabella stumbled backward, her face a mask of pure panic. "That's a lie. Those records were sealed. They were supposed to be destroyed." Sarah's eyes flashed with fire. "You mean you paid to have them destroyed?" Arthur Thorne finally spoke, his voice low and shaking, his eyes locked on his wife. "Isabella, is any of this true?" Isabella turned to him, her perfect facade completely shattered. Mascara ran down her cheeks in black rivers. "Arthur, please. You can't believe this. This servant. She's doing this to ruin us." "To ruin you!" But Sarah wasn't finished. She reached into her pocket one last time and pulled out a small, creased photograph. It showed a newborn's face, peaceful in death. "The nurse took this for me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She said every mother deserves a picture of her child. Your name is on the back, Isabella. Your signature on the form that declared my living, breathing daughter a medical waste." Arthur Thorne took the photo. His hand shook so badly he could barely hold it. The world he had built, the perfect life, the perfect parties, the perfect wife was crumbling into dust around him. "It was to protect your career." Isabella shrieked, her voice desperate and ugly. "It was a mistake. It wasn't murder." "A mistake." Sarah's voice rose, filled with a decade of fury. "My baby suffocated on a cold floor because you didn't want your party guests to be disturbed. You don't get to call that a mistake." A man in the back of the crowd, a well-known journalist, pushed his way forward, his own phone recording. "I remember this," he said loudly. "I was a junior reporter. I tried to follow up on a tip about a maid and a baby at the Thorne mansion. My editor told me to drop it. He said the Thornes made a very large donation to the paper's charity fund that week." He aimed his phone directly at Isabella's horrified face. "Well, Mrs. Thorne, it looks like the story is finally going to be printed." Arthur looked from the photo to the journalist, to the terror in his wife's eyes. He looked at Sarah, who stood there shaking, not with rage anymore, but with the sheer weight of her long-held pain. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked her, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah gave a sad, bitter laugh. "I did. I wrote you a letter a month after it happened. I never heard back. I tried to hire a lawyer. No one would take my case against the great Arthur Thorne. They called me crazy. They told me to take the money your wife sent and disappear, but I couldn't. Her grave deserved more than that. My Lily deserved more." The female officer turned to her partner. "Call it in. We're bringing them both downtown." She then looked at Mr. Thorne. "Sir, You and your wife will need to come with us to answer some questions. Isabella grabbed her husband's arm, her nails digging into his expensive suit. Arthur, do something, stop them. You can't let them do this to me. He slowly pulled his arm away from her grasp, his face a mixture of horror, disgust, and a terrible dawning regret. His voice was cold as ice. You already locked someone away once tonight, Isabella. He looked at Sarah. You won't do it again. Isabella's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the marble floor, sobbing. As camera flashes went off all around her like lightning, Sarah stood still, the silver locket clutched in her hand. For the first time in 10 years, she wasn't just a maid, a waitress, a ghost. She was a mother whose voice was finally being heard. The story exploded. The video from the restaurant was everywhere online. News channels played it on a loop. The headlines were brutal. The Thorn Terror, Mansion of Horrors, Murder for a Mansion Party. Former maids and butlers who had been fired and paid to stay silent for years started coming forward, telling reporters stories of Isabella's cruelty. Weeks later, Sarah sat in the front row of a packed courtroom. She was wearing a simple blue dress, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The benches behind her were filled with supporters, nurses, waitresses, mothers, and strangers who had been moved by her story. Isabella was led into the courtroom in handcuffs. She wore a plain prison jumpsuit, her designer clothes and diamonds replaced by drab gray cotton. She looked small and broken. She glanced at her husband Arthur, who sat alone across the aisle, looking like a ghost. He refused to meet her eyes. The prosecutor laid out the evidence. The hospital records, the journalist's testimony about the cover-up, the old butler, George, who tearfully testified that he had heard Sarah's muffled screams but was ordered by Isabella to turn up the music. The final piece of evidence was from the medical examiner. After exhuming the infant's remains, the prosecutor said, his voice echoing in the silent room, our forensic team confirmed the nurse's initial report. The baby was born healthy and viable. The cause of death was asphyxiation, consistent with being left unattended in a poorly ventilated space after birth. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Isabella's shoulders shook. This was not a mistake, the prosecutor said, pointing a finger at Isabella. This was an act of unimaginable cruelty and selfishness. This was murder. Isabella jumped to her feet, her voice a desperate scream. I didn't want her to die. I just wanted it to be quiet. You don't understand the pressure, the parties, my husband's reputation. Sarah stood up then, her voice quiet but carrying more weight than Isabella's screams. You wanted silence, Mrs. Thorne, she said, looking directly at the woman who had ruined her life. And you got it. For 10 long years you had silence. But my daughter's memory was never silent. And God is never silent forever. The judge banged his gavel. He looked at Isabella, his face grim. Isabella Thorne for the crimes of second-degree murder, falsification of official documents, and obstruction of justice. I hereby sentence you to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The gavel struck again. Final. Isabella let out a horrible, animalistic scream as deputies grabbed her arms and began to drag her away. Arthur, please, she cried. Help me. He just sat there, his face buried in his hands. Outside the courthouse, Sarah was surrounded by reporters. They shoved microphones in her face, asking how she felt. Vindicated? Happy? She simply held up the small silver locket for them all to see. Justice doesn't bring my Lily back, she said softly, but I hope that any other person out there who feels invisible and silenced sees this. I hope they know that the truth is worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes. That night, locked away in a cold concrete cell, Isabella Thorne could finally hear it. It wasn't the sound of a jazz band or polite applause. It was the faint, ghostly echo of a baby's cry, a sound she would now hear for the rest of her life. And miles away, under a simple tree in a quiet cemetery, a mother could finally breathe. The weight of 10 years was finally lifted. Her promise was kept. A year later, a soft autumn sun warmed the small cemetery on the city's south side. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of a tall oak tree, its branches stretching like protective arms over a new polished gravestone. The stone read, Lily, 2015. Her first breath was a whisper, but her story became a roar. Sarah knelt on the soft grass, placing a small bouquet of fresh daisies by the stone. Her hand rested on the smooth, cool granite. "It's quiet now, sweetie," she whispered. "Mama made sure they heard you." The tarnished silver locket, her constant companion through the darkest years, felt warm in her hand. She opened it, looking at the tiny faded photo, and a small, peaceful smile touched her lips. "You can sleep now, my love." The crunch of leaves on the path made her turn. Arthur Thorne stood a few feet away. He wore a simple dark coat, not a designer suit. The power and pride were gone from his face, replaced by the deep lines of guilt and sorrow. He was just a man, haunted by a past he could not change. "I know sorry is a useless word," he said, his voice quiet and raspy. "But I had to come. I had to thank you for having the courage I never did." Sarah looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time not as a powerful CEO, but as a man broken by the truth. "You weren't the one who turned the key, Mr. Thorne," she said softly. "But you built the house where doors like that could be locked without anyone asking why." Tears welled in Arthur's eyes. "And I'll spend the rest of my life tearing those houses down," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. He knelt beside her, placing a single white lily next to her daisies. For a long moment they stayed there in silence, two people from different worlds forever bound by a life that was lost between them. As they finally stood and turned to leave, the camera panned up to the sky. Sunlight streamed through the oak tree's branches, and for just a second, the gentle sound of a baby's happy laugh seemed to dance on the wind, light and finally free. If this story touched your heart today, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who believes that truth still matters. Because somewhere another mother is still waiting to be heard.